how do you manage expectations? Because to me, when I think about expectations, it's something that people have in their heads. So how do you manage what people think?
Yeah, it's...
Senem, welcome to the podcast. It's good to have you here finally, after so many times that we waited for each other.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You were super busy towards the end of the year. I will not ask you specifics about that.
Okay.
So the reason why you are here is because Hussein, your ex-team member, he suggested you. He was here a long time ago. Now he's with Google.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So here you are. What is your memory of Hussein?
Well, I can say that ever since I joined Sony, he was a good colleague of mine, and I learned a lot of things from Hussein.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks to him, I loved localization. He was all the time super enthusiastic about localization, and I can say that I learned from him a lot, because that's how I got into localization after I joined Sony. And so I had a chance to work with him, and I learned a lot from him. Well, I have only good memories.
Yeah, that's exactly my question that I wanted to ask you, like how you got into localization, because I know that your background, you haven't started in localization right after you graduated.
Yes. Uh-huh. Well, I have a bachelor's degree in American literature, and I taught English as a part-time job.
Mm-hmm.
And in my first professional role as a marketing specialist, I was actually responsible for local market adaptation for sales and marketing materials.
Mm-hmm.
And for technical staff, I was buying translation.
Mm.
And I also worked as a translator. But without being aware of localization industry, I took little part in it. And that was the time I worked closely with sales people and with end customers. And there I really felt strongly how important the localization is.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had my master's degree in business management, and I continued working as an account manager in aviation industry, completely different industry. My background helped me develop my account management, relationship management, and stakeholder management skills. And then I got my role at Sony's in-house localization team as a senior localization project manager. I got interested in this role because it heavily involved account management,
mm-hmm.
stakeholder and relationship management rather than pure translation skills. And yeah, it has been 7 years now. I'm really enjoying it. And starting day one, I've started learning, and I'm still learning.
Yes.
And I never had a dull day. There was always something exciting. And I was involved in challenging globalization projects, which I learned a lot. And I also worked with highly talented localization professionals like Hussein. And I also learned a lot from our translation partners. I attended LocWorld. I read multilingual magazines a lot. And yeah, I'm really enjoying it right now.
Did you attend LocWorld this week?
No, not this year. Well, in my early years, I attended twice. Yeah, and then, I didn't.
Why not? Why did you stop?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, especially this year. After some time, I attended twice. And then I felt like there's not much new that I can learn.
Mm-hmm.
So we also started sending some teammates to the LocWorld so that they can also get some benefit.
I was wondering if you had the same experience that my friend had. So he was a vendor manager at Autodesk, so also on the buyer client side, and he told me that his experience is just like you're basically like a hot girl in a bar. Like everybody comes hitting on you with their business cards and, hey, can we do business with you? I want to introduce myself and so on. Did you feel like that?
Yes, I felt like that everyone wants to talk to you, everyone wants to share something, they invite to lunch, etc. Yeah, it can be like that.
Good. So okay, before we start, so FYI, the topic of the theme of our conversation will be stakeholder management, but I like this discussion so far. And this is technically related to maybe account management and stakeholder management. What would be your advice to people who go to these conferences to hand out their business cards? Like, what would be a better approach?
I'm not sure, because that's why you're in LocWorld. That's why you have a place in LocWorld to engage with the customers and to talk about yourself, to talk about the services. So I'm not sure if there's a better way.
Okay.
But if there are, more case studies that they present in sessions, other than repeating themselves about their translation management system, about translation memory, so we know these by heart anyway. Somehow they need to create a showcase their value added services. I don't know how it can be done, but there can be a better way.
Well, I was thinking, because you said that your purpose for you coming to LocWorld wasn't to stand there and take all the business cards, but you wanted to learn something, right? So yes. I think like the path to your heart would be through someone being able to teach you something new, right? Or show you something new. Like, surprise me, right?
That's correct.
Right. Okay.
Surprise me, teach me something new, something real. Yeah. A case study and examples from the companies, how they solved the localization problem. So this kind of sessions. So I still remember the Taos session, how they approach quality. They even defined what quality is, what was the definition in the old times. So what does quality even mean?
Right.
And then they discussed further. I even applied some of what I learned from there to the business, to what I do when I come back. So I still remember that session, for example.
Now, this is a great thing that you just mentioned, this, like, what actually is the quality? Because that was my very first question regarding our topic. When we talk about stakeholder management, a lot of the people, like, even if you're starting out just as a project manager, you hear a lot about stakeholders. But what actually are stakeholders? Like, who do you consider your stakeholders? Because there are so many people that could be considered your stakeholders, but is everybody important in the same way?
That's a good question, but there's too many questions.
I know. That's my problem. So let's think about, like, who do you consider stakeholders? Well,
I consider everyone involved, every team involved in a project or in a program. I consider a stakeholder. I even consider my manager as a stakeholder.
Right.
Because there can be many definitions of stakeholder management. What it is for me is effective communication. What I mean is that getting to know the people, the teams involved in a project, getting to know their roles, their expectations, their impact, and accordingly, you set the tone for communication. And it can even follow up, decide when to communicate, what to communicate, how to communicate. For example, the level of detail I share with a senior stakeholder is limited,
right,
a high level, whereas with technical teams, I get into detail and share the whole story. Yes, somehow, creating this communication channel and giving regular update, I think it's at the heart of stakeholder management. And I gave an example that my manager should also be updated about everything, about the issues, about the mistakes that I did. So my plan to mitigate those mistakes, etc. So even she can be considered a stakeholder to me.
Do you see yourself as a center of all these different communications, and you're just, let's say, passing the right message to the right channel so that everybody's updated?
Yes. Sometimes I have the role of a communication bridge between business and the technical teams. So I need to translate business expectations, and I also in return need to translate the technical perspective or the technical details to the business. So I can consider myself at the heart of communication. So when the localization is the question.
Yes. That's a good way to say the heart of the communication. Yeah, I like that. So does it mean that if you are at the center and the bridge between business and technical, and we know that your background is business and account management, but does it mean that you also need to have a certain level of knowledge of the technical side so that you understand the people who are more technical oriented?
Yes, of course. Like I mentioned, so ever since I started, I found myself in big globalization projects where I was responsible for the localization stream. And there, I needed to learn how to, not, deep technical terms, but I need to learn that, yes, CMS can be integrated into TMS. So in order to do that, what are the steps and who should be involved? So this level of technical detail, I think, is expected from a localization program manager or localization project manager. At least you should be able to know who to go when you plan a project or when you have issues. So you need to have a level of technical detail, yes.
So if you decide for yourself to go into this phase where you want to know a little bit more about technicality, because, okay, what I'm trying to point out is that a lot of the, let's say, account managers, they don't want to get their hands dirty with technicalities. And let's say they say that they trust their team. So what is like the balance between knowing a little bit more about the technicality so that you can have maybe better conversations with the team and they see you more like an equal partner, versus being a manager who maybe doesn't know that many details, but they trust their team. So whatever the team comes up, they take it like for granted without challenging the team because they don't have the knowledge to challenge them, right?
Yes, you're right. Well, it depends on your role in the program and in the project. So when I was a localization project manager, so I needed to learn the technical stuff. And so in order to direct my stakeholders, also in order to direct so my team and my translation partners. So I needed to have hands-on experience. And since I started as a localization project manager, so I learned how things are done. And now, together with my team, I'm responsible for more business units and more operations. Yes, I know the technical side, some level of technical side of what my team is doing. Well, of course, I trust them, but still I have hands-on experience.
Right.
Still, when they have a question, I can answer. Or, of course, there are some operations that I ask questions to my team because I don't know. So, yes, it's some sort of level I have the details. Yes, I have hands-on experience.
Do you think it gives you an advantage? Do you think, like, let's say somebody's starting who doesn't know anything about localization, but they're really good at business, and they start working at, I don't know, let's say Google or whatever, or at your company. Would you tell them that, yes, go learn at least a little bit about the technicalities? Or do you think they can perform their job well by just taking the input from the technical team?
It's a good question. Very good question. Well, I would definitely advise them to learn some level of technical detail. So in our job, I think they should. Because I don't know, maybe it's special to localization. So you're managing a team, but at the same time, you need to get things done. So you need to know this kind of things, and you need to direct your team accordingly. So when they have an issue, when they don't know how to resolve it, if you know the background, if you know the root cause, if you had a similar issue in the past, I think this experience tells you a lot in problem solving.
I agree. Yeah, I'll stop focusing on the other part because I was just curious about this. One thing when we're talking about the stakeholders, what I always consider stakeholders, and this is kind of like extended version of stakeholders, is the end users. Do you consider them to be stakeholders or not that much?
Not that much, no, because they do have an impact on what I do, but not directly.
Right.
That's why not necessarily I call them my stakeholder.
Is it more like somebody from your, let's say, closer stakeholders basically represents the end users? Let's say the customer support.
Yes, they do.
Good. Okay. A similar question, and this is the one that we got from our dear Hussein. So how do you differentiate between partners and stakeholders?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, of course, I still treat my partners as a stakeholder,
right?
Because still there should be a communication breach that I should create, because they are part of how can I say, they have also a place in the process that we are managing. So they are responsible for some steps. So in the process, in the program, so they should be aware of why we are doing. So they should be involved in the planning ahead of time. So they should get regular updates. And they should also know what project success means, so that they also work towards the same goal. And at the end, again, they should be involved in lessons learned and everything. So, well, I can consider them as stakeholders as well. Maybe, of course, with a limited information is given to them, but it's because more will be a detail for them.
Right.
And maybe more will be too much information, too much irrelevant information. But I can call them stakeholder or partner, even closer than a stakeholder. I think partner, the word itself, is more friendly than a stakeholder.
Yeah, stakeholder is like someone in a suit that has a bad look, angry look. He's very mean and just want to see the numbers. And partners are like your buddies that you get shit done together.
Agree. And so if I move on the question, the answer, how I differentiate the stakeholders internally. So how I differentiate my stakeholders internally, I can say that yes, there is a ranking that I don't treat them the same, because most of my stakeholders acknowledge me as a trusted advisor in this field. That's why they don't necessarily have a deep understanding of localization. And so these are the people who I can consider the most strategic stakeholders. And for example, when I talk about localization, translation processes, or any localization impact, I avoid speaking as if I'm giving a speech at LocWorld. I try to be as simple as possible. Anyway, and like I mentioned, there are occasions where I act as a communication bridge between business and the technical teams. And I think the more understandable you are, the more trusted you become in the eyes of people. So if I sense that my stakeholder has a limited knowledge about localization, I try to be as simple as possible, and I try to be understandable as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I rank the stakeholders who has a deep understanding of localization, or the ones who doesn't have much knowledge about localization.
Mm-hmm. So my question actually would be, how do you differentiate between communicating and reporting? Because reporting, if you send someone a report, it's technically communicating something, but it's not just done in a meeting setting.
Yes, you're right. But when we mention reporting, what comes to my mind is, so let's say you're doing a good job for your stakeholders. You understood the expectations and you manage everything accordingly. You plan accordingly. You give regular updates. But in the end, in order to show that you achieve the expectations and you achieve your targets, you need to show it. You need to make it visible.
Right.
So in order to make it visible, you either do it in a reporting, or you either present it, or you either create a case study and let them sign it. Yeah, these are the things that comes into my mind. But, well, of course, if you're working on a more solid things, like if you promise the CAT tools and TM will save money in the long run, if you make such a promise and if you set your process accordingly, then you should be able to prove it with numbers. And that's what you can do for your stakeholder. Or if you're putting an extra effort for translation budget management, and if you're helping your stakeholder achieve the forecast accuracy by raising the risks in time, and that again can be a good way of reporting your success other than creating a communication channel.
My question would be, in which cases would you rather send a report, let's say just via email, to your stakeholders, and when you would organize a presentation and explain the numbers through your words?
Mm-hmm.
Is it based on how the stakeholders are familiar with what you're already doing? If they are expecting just a report, or would you, let's say you have a new stakeholder, first communicate more and maybe then eventually switch to just sending reports?
Yes. That's a good question. So I can think of examples for both. When you are at the beginning of program or a project, so you agree on some points that you need to do. For example, a regular translation cost reporting. So of course, when you without even creating that report, you need to agree on the format of the report. So setting up a meeting and going through the report to understand if it meets their expectations, their requirements, or they need more information, etc. If there are any irrelevant information, you can miss. So setting the expectations and working towards that target. So at the beginning of everything, you need to definitely meet and agree on the output. And then maybe when you send it for the first time, again, a meeting can be a good point. But if it becomes regular, then just sending an email will be enough.
Right. Yeah. So if I can ask you in the way that you like it before, so if you were to give an advice for, let's say, all the project managers or all the account managers, should the goal be to try to get your stakeholders to just accept the report like your end goal because it's more efficient, right? My only problem with a lot of presentations is that people just talk about the things that you can just read from a report. So should that be like our end goal when we think about stakeholder management? In order to do the stakeholder management efficiently, should we try to get our stakeholders into a position where we can just send them a report with nice numbers, everything's green, and they're like happy with that?
Well, it again depends. So I think while creating the report, the stakeholder should talk more so that it becomes as if it's their idea to create the report, and so that they feel, happier. uh, so let's imagine that you agree on a report and you are sending on a regular basis, but I'm sure there are some things to consider because of some changes. For example, if it's a transition cost report, if it shows a very high number, it should be communicated, it should be highlighted. Or so I think, I don't know, maybe it was in my world, so things change very quickly. So the report you create and send last year should be different now. So if it is not different, then something is wrong, or you're not doing your job efficiently. You're not seeing the improvements. So even that reporting can be done in a platform, not in emails. So some kind of efficiency improvement, a change should be introduced. That's for sure. I don't know if I answered your question correctly. Yeah, that's how it should be done.
Okay. And in your world, you spoke about your world. Do fancy dinners have a place in your world? And just to elaborate, because this is super generic, I'm coming from a perspective of mostly vendors who typically want to sometimes visit. I mean, before COVID, they used to visit their clients to have the fancy dinners and try to take the relationship to a more personal level. Your clients are mostly internal. Before COVID, did you still try to meet them in person? Did you maybe even fly to different offices if your clients were in different locations to build a more personal relationship?
Yeah, that's a good question. So maybe I can give a general answer. So I think in localization industry, fancy dinners are a bit critical. I'm not sure if they really work. So I think if you do a great job and if you make it visible to the stakeholder, that means a success for you. And in order to get to know your stakeholders, more face-to-face meetings, they mean a lot. I really support that. And how it is done in big corporations, and I think internally with your own stakeholders, coming together for business review meetings on a regular basis, quarterly, maybe in every 6 months. So it is a very good way of showing what you have done so far for them. So again, with your translation partners, I think it's also important. Of course, you can go on a fancy dinner after the meeting. But what you present in the meeting, if you can show your value add in a correct way, if your numbers are correct, if my stakeholder thinks that, yes, you're showing a very high translation cost because there were a lot of product launches this year, so it makes sense. So if you can show consistent numbers in this kind of meetings, and if you can bring improvement suggestions to the table, I think that's part of stakeholder management. Doing a great job and making it visible, and yes, a meeting with your stakeholders on a regular basis. They can be invited to your office so that they also know your office environment, or you can go to their office, assuming that the stakeholders are all around the world. Yeah, with this kind of visits and business review meetings, you can also establish a personal relations, and you can build relationship as well. So I think it's a good way. But fancy dinners comes at the very end.
Yes. I agree. Like the quality of your work should be the the baseline that you can build on. What I'm saying is maybe this is just my stupid impression, or it's just in my head, because I thought that like some people try to make up for their lack of quality with these personal chit chats and talking about personal things. And I'm not sure if all the clients would be as rational as you. So, I'm thinking like if in some cases it's actually a good strategy to really try to bring the relationship to a more personal level to, let's say, cover up for the for the lack of quality in your actual work.
Yes, you can be right. Maybe I'm too professional for this. Well, before I joined this industry, it worked well. The fancy dinners and being more personal with the clients, because the industry was different. But you can do a lot by showing your great job.
Yeah.
But of course, it doesn't hurt if you also build some personal relations with your stakeholders.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, it will be useful.
Yes. So would you say that people who, let's say, I don't know, are account managers or project managers, and they have reached let's say, the good level of quality of their work, that as a next step, they should start working on the personal relationship?
Of course, yes.
Always, with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And how do you do that?
Well, again, if you can meet on a regular basis, it gives you a very good chance of getting to know that person more. And but of course, if you have a chance to meet, if they accept this kind of business review meetings. Other than that, again, with your most strategic stakeholders, you can have one-to-one sessions where you also talk about business and where you can also talk about other stuff. Maybe they are personal matters. Yeah, I definitely support that.
What if you have a stakeholder who is like business only, work only, and you try to talk about your kids or family, you ask him, and he's like, nah, I don't want to talk about it. Do you just accept it as it is and just move on and only focus on the business? Or do you try to break the ice?
Well, it depends on why they are trying to build the wall. For example, there can be people who is not eager to talk, maybe because of a language barrier. And if so, they may avoid meeting so that they need to speak English and they may not be confident. Then I try writing. Still, if they want to, I try using internal communicators, or I try using emails. But still, if they want to keep the wall, I wouldn't try any harder. Yes.
Yeah, probably respect it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. One quick question. We were talking about quarterly business reviews, QBRs. Then you said that maybe they could even be every 6 months. How do you determine the frequency of these business reviews?
Actually, if it is me who is going to decide, I would make it on a quarterly basis. It means that you have a chance to see your stakeholder frequently. And also you have a quarterly data, so you have a very good stuff to present.
Mm-hmm.
But it depends on the stakeholder who decides the frequency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they can, it's a bit sad to say, but they can consider, there are some stakeholders who consider localization as a step. It's not necessarily a strategic part of the process. Then they don't want to hear more, as long as you manage to get the translations on time. as long as the quality is at the expected level. And so there's a set process, so they may not want to hear more. They can even say, okay, you're good at everything, so we don't need to meet on a regular basis. It's because maybe they consider localization as a step, or it means that you are actually doing good. You don't need to prove yourself with numbers and with presentations, etc.
Yeah. They don't need to look into the box. They just bought the black box. And as long as it takes that one step that they expect it to do, then all is fine. Okay, next thing I wanted to talk about communication. And we hear the expression managing expectations a lot, especially when it comes to stakeholders. How do you manage expectations? Because to me, when I think about expectations, it's something that people have in their heads. So how do you manage what people think?
Yeah, it shouldn't be in your head, first of all. So I think the very first step is to understand the expectation crystal clear. So all stakeholders should agree on the project success before the project begins. So let's assume you understood the expectation, you plan the tasks, and set the goals for yourself. I think it's important, again, to communicate with the stakeholder, saying that, so according to your expectation, I planned these activities, and so I planned these tasks. And if they agree, yes, you're on the right path, you understood me. Then, again, whenever you hit a milestone and achieve a target, again, it should be communicated and you should make the accomplishment visible, so that nothing comes as a surprise in the end. So if I am to give an example, so if you're working on a localization workflow setup for a particular product, and if the one of the expectations is to keep the translation cost under control, and accordingly, let's assume you planned adding an authorization stage maybe before the translation starts, where the stakeholder can see the cost, and you agreed sending a regular translation cost reports. So when you plan this, the stakeholder should know. So you wanted to keep the costs under control, so I put these checkers. So before the translations, you can see the translation cost here. So you should, I think, make it visible. And if you agree on regular translation cost reports, you should agree on the format. So they should know. It shouldn't be something unreadable. It can mean something to you, but it should also mean something to them. Also, you should decide how frequently you should send the report. Anyway, these should be communicated. So you understood the expectations, you planned accordingly, and you also showed the output. And when everything is done, I think you should be able to present it, make it visible, that you successfully meet the expectations. I think that's how you can manage the expectation.
Right. Yeah. I had two thoughts. I'm not sure if I want to dump both of them on you. When you were talking about expectations and having everything clear, it reminded me of SMART, SMART goals. Do you think expectations should always be SMART, like specific, measurable? Or do you sometimes deal with expectations that cannot be measured?
Yes, maybe we can combine this question with stakeholders management KPIs, because it can be something abstract. Yeah, it's a good question, but it's made me think.
I'm just waiting for you to charge me for these questions, because you have to do a lot of hard work here.
Yes. Well, I think there are still some expectations that you cannot maybe clearly talk about or you may miss. And so what can be done, what I have been doing, for example, to send regular surveys to the stakeholders. If they are happy with the communication style you have, if you are able to meet the expectations, so you can, I think, hear the voice of customer through these surveys. So if they give you low score, it means that you missed something.
When you talk about customers, are you referring to your internal direct customers, or are we talking about the end customers?
I'm talking about the internal direct customers, which happen to be stakeholders.
Okay.
So, yes, in a way, they are, we can call them customer. Yes, it was a good question. Yes, the internal customers, yes, they can be considered stakeholder, but they are not all your stakeholders. So when I talk about meeting expectations, I talk about this strategic stakeholders who can be considered internal customers. So I talk about meeting their expectations. So yeah, through regular surveys, you can, I think, understand if you're on the right path or not. And yes, this kind of surveys, and also for the other stakeholders, even they can be considered colleagues, getting their reviews also on a regular basis. It tells you if you're on the right path.
Okay.
You don't seem to be satisfied with the answer.
No. I'm thinking if I should follow up. No. I think you answered it well. Like, I wanted to ask you a question, but then I'm thinking, would it be too specific? So maybe, okay, you touched on the point of surveys. So maybe in general, what information, like what are the questions that you ask your customers? I think a lot of what I'm familiar with is, I think it's the net promoter score. Like how would you on a scale of 0 to 10, would you recommend our services to someone? And that's the only question. I think that a lot of the SaaS businesses use this as the only question to indicate whether their customers love their product. Is this something that applies also to localization, or what kind of questions, if you can give us an example, would you ask in this survey?
Yeah. Well, if I give a general answer, so we of course need to define the stakeholders and the ones who are involved in translations, who have a saying on the translation quality. So they can be considered end customers and also sales and marketing people in big corporations. So the survey which is sent to them is different. So it talks about should be different. So the questions are like, are you happy with the translation quality? Can you give a score out of 10? Or if you think something is wrong, what is wrong? Is it about the terminology, grammar, or issues, or this kind of questions? Or are you happy with the in-house localization team? So this is a type of question, but this is targeting sales and marketing people only, if they're happy with the translation quality. On the other hand, the survey that you are sending the stakeholders, it can be just one simple question. Are you happy with the services that you get from this organization?
Right.
And they can answer, they can give a score out of 5. And they can also insert their comments. Also, if you do something wrong, if something goes wrong, or if you fail to communicate properly in advance, if you don't see the risks in time, etc., and if something fails because of you, or if something delays, you get escalation. So the number of escalations are also used if you are good at stakeholder management or not. Maybe you did something at the background, you maybe prevented some issues, but you failed to communicate it to the stakeholders, and it's ended up in escalation. So something is wrong here. So that can be used also to measure your performance in stakeholder management.
Thank you. So going back to the expectations of the stakeholders, I want to talk a little about money and ROI. Because to me, also from recent discussions on LinkedIn, when you're trying to convince your stakeholders who don't know much about localization, to me, it seems like the only way to do it and to convince someone to do something extra is to give them a clear ROI. Do you think it's the case that you always need to present the numbers? That's my question number one. Let's start with that.
Well, I think yes. Also, well, it depends on the scale of a translation project. So if you're talking about a website which is translated into 50 languages, then well, you should have a very good amount of budget. So we are talking about very high numbers here. And so when you first, for example, if you're going to make a forecast, you work on a budget, and if you just tell the stakeholder that, yes, you should budget like 5 million euros on a yearly basis, yes, of course, it will freak them out. That's why you need to show some details. So you gave me a scope, that's the number of words which are going to be translated. So these are the rates for each language. And we talked about 50 languages. So let's take one language as an example and calculate it. So, well, you definitely need to give the numbers and some level of detail in order not to freak out the stakeholder. And it's, again, even for simple projects and for ad hoc projects, you are really need to work with people who doesn't know about localization. And again, your communication should be different. So if it is the first time they are engaged with you, you need to talk about localization. You need to talk about translation memory. Well, the first project can be costly, but thanks to translation memory, the costs will be expected to go down. So you should be able to tell them. And also, again, you should be as simple as possible. So there are times that I need to justify DTP cost, and without mentioning DTP and its dictionary definition. I needed to.
When I'm training project managers like who have no experience in localization and we talk about DTP, I just say DTP people make things pretty.
Yeah, that's a good one.
If you want your assets to look pretty, we need DTP.
Yeah.
But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a difficult definition, but it's an additional cost that most of the internal customers fails to budget it. So why it is there? It's an unexpected cost, and you need to justify it. Again, what was your question?
I don't even know, but I have a follow-up question. So one of the scenarios that I'm sure that you have probably come across, because to me it seems like okay, DTP is an extra service, but maybe for some people even a translation is like an extra service because they know about Google Translate. They will be like, why do we need to pay the translators 5 million to translate the website into 50 languages? Why can we not just use machine translation? And how do you convince them about the quality that machine translation, which is something they may not even know about, produces versus a human?
If you're talking about a big corporation, a reputable company, and who is I don't know, just using a poor machine translation. So for some language, of course, it really works. And maybe with some additional proofreading, etc., it proves to be good. But I'm focusing purely on your question. I don't judge the machine translation here. But while I explain this to the stakeholders, I actually explain the localization process, how the website is translated, how the content is translated. And well, if we talk specifically for a website, why do we need a translation? Because of globalization, you need to make a global product. You need to be able to sell it in the local market. You need to localize the product. And it is more than a translation. So the localization should be, I think, explained. And if we are talking about the big reputable companies, so this is something you cannot just ignore and go on with a process which you are not sure.
Mm-hmm. Have you tried to convince your stakeholders about something for which you didn't have any numbers to convince them? Or maybe even something that didn't have a positive ROI or that couldn't be measured in numbers? I'm just wondering if you can think of something from the top of your head. For example, okay, now I just thought about it. Like, I'm not sure how much you use transcreation, but I think transcreation versus translation could be one of those things where it's difficult to judge how much return we're going to get on a simple translation versus somebody who gives it more love to the titles or the headlines. So that could be an example.
Yes. Well, what can be done is that, okay, if you're talking to a stakeholder and if you're talking about choosing a translation and transcreation, I would again involve the stakeholders. So you want this evaluation because of the feedbacks that you receive from the countries. So let's involve countries and let's give them a pure translation, a standard translation, and let's also give them a transcreation. Let them evaluate.
Mm-hmm.
Let them give a score to that, and you will know the cost of a standard translation and the transcreation. So standard translation. So these are the rates applied to the words. For transcreation, these are the rates applied to the words. Transcreation will take longer time. But let's hear what your countries will say about them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I would involve him in decision making. And again, I would try to create some proofs that transcreation will work.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like an A/B test in some way. Okay, good. Now that's about convincing the stakeholders. But what if your stakeholders come to you with a request that you don't seem like a good way or like they're thinking too wild? How do you say no to stakeholders?
Yeah, that's a good one. I like this kind of situations. It's not that I like saying no. I would definitely avoid saying no directly.
Like, should you always try to accommodate whatever the stakeholders come up with?
No, definitely not. No. I think there are always no's. It should be. You shouldn't just say yes to everything, say yes to the things that you cannot do. Well, while I like this kind of situations because it also forces me to think out of the box and create alternatives. So if there's a no, there should be alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe without directly saying no, I would emphasize with the requests. So I understand your expectation is this. And So if I understood you correctly, this cannot be done in this way. So instead, these are the alternatives that we can do. And that's how I would structure my words.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can also give you some examples. For example, if the request is to get is to complete localization workflow in 5 days, whereas you schedule 10 days to complete it, then you need to list the steps and their duration, their importance, etc. And then I think the stakeholder will will show empathy to you.
Yeah, they will understand the reason why.
So as long as you give a reason, and as long as you don't focus on the no and the reason for no, but also if you focus on the alternatives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you're talking about the alternatives, I was thinking about that's the time when you would have gone to Hussein. Hussein, think about something new.
Yeah, he's also a kind of person who can think out of the box, and he can create millions of crazy ideas.
Yeah. Okay, I have a few more questions. I know that it's pretty late for you. When we're talking about the KPIs, when we were talking about, specifically when you were talking about how you communicate differently to different stakeholders because their expectations, the reports could be different. Do you have this all in some sort of plan? Do you have a plan for all your stakeholders, or maybe, I don't know, some system like a CRM system where you have these informations for different stakeholders and how to treat them? Or how do you approach this? How are you systematic about your stakeholder management?
It's a good question, but I don't have a plan. So
Okay.
Can I skip this question?
Do you think it's too much to have a system for this, or it's natural to you that whenever you are sending a report to someone, you know exactly, it's in your head? So
far, it has been natural to me.
Mm-hmm.
But while thinking about your questions, I know this question, I thought about it. I thought about it for my team. If we can have a plan like this, so that they know when they first start working as a project manager, that they should know your stakeholders. Maybe they can write down their engagement points, etc. So how frequently they should engage with them. Such a plan can be created. But so far it has been natural to me. I didn't think about it.
Right.
You made me think about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think when I was working in my previous company, we were thinking of doing something similar, but we never got to it. But to me, it makes such a huge sense. Because let's say in a typical case where you are, I don't know, a project manager, you do the day-to-day projects and you have a direct customer, you get to know them a lot on a day-to-day basis. And then maybe the people above you, let's say your level, who represent, I don't know, let's say localization managers or account managers when we talk about the vendor side, they know that person from a different perspective. And you all kind of have some insights about that person. So if you put that in one document.
Yes, you're right.
It's kind of I don't know, profiling people. It's not a dating site, but.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, we talk about these things. We definitely talk about these things. But yeah, it's never written down.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I'm powerful. I had this question, but I think I'll probably skip it. So let's just do 2 final questions. This is actually a very good segue to what we were just discussing right now. How do you, let's say Hussein was working with you or somebody new joins your team, how do you teach them about stakeholder management, and how do you tell them to get better at it?
Yeah, it's again a good question. Well, if there's a newcomer in the team, I think they should know the people who are involved in a project and who are involved in their business, and what is their impact, what is their roles. It needs to be explained to them, so they need to write it down, and their day-to-day basis contacts and their high-level stakeholders, all needs to be written down and all needs to be discussed. And it needs to be discussed on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, I don't have any structured plan to onboard, but it's again in the it comes natural in knowledge sharing process. In the onboarding process, you talk about the stakeholders,
right,
and they know who they are going to work on a daily basis. For the most strategic ones, again, you together go and engage with them.
I think one of the things that I'm still learning to get used to is that what comes natural to me doesn't have to be natural to other people.
Yeah, of course.
You know how there's the saying that the common sense is the least common of senses.
I haven't heard it, but it's a good sentence. Yes. Also, it depends on your experience level.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've started working, if you're a newly graduate and if you have just started working, yes. So what is a common sense for an experienced person is not a common sense for a new graduate. So it may not be natural for them. Yes, I get that a lot. Yeah, I think the same.
All right. Well, Senem, thank you very much for the interview. We had a lovely 1 hour talking about stakeholder management.
Thank you.
And maybe I'll talk to you soon about your personal life and who is Senem as a person.
Yeah, why not? Of course.
All right. Bye-bye. Bye, Senem.
Bye. Thank you.